Tim Goulding and his wife Georgina live on Eagle Hill near Allohies in West Cork. In what was once a ramshackle old ruin in the 60s, it has been renovated and extended over the years to include an art studio, recording studio and guest accommodation called the Cuckoo's Nest.
We're on the Berry Peninsula, the end of the Berry Peninsula, and as you know, the bottom of Ireland is like that.
Yes.
There's the peninsulas hanging out there, and we're at the very end of this peninsula here, the Berry Peninsula.
Yeah.
On the Cod's Head, it's called. So, and I came here in 1968, having grown up in Wicklow, County Wicklow, here in Enniskerry, and very much involved in the art scene because my dad was a big art collector. So I grew up with paintings everywhere, under the bed, behind the wall, and so that was my art education.
Yeah.
Really.
So was it inevitable that you'd go into this?
I think
area?
it was. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, my mum and dad were worried about me, of course. Rebel son, and the black sheep in some ways. But anyway, a Swedish lady came to the Kilkenny Design Workshops in about 1964 and offered me a scholarship in Stockholm. I did a 2-week course with her, and she was the head of the textile design department in Konstfackskolan, the School of Art in Stockholm. And she gave me a 2-year scholarship, and they were delighted because finally he's got something he can make a living and become a textile designer.
Yes, yes.
And I was there for about 4 months, and I was in a class of 16 girls doing embroidery, and lovely as that was, I really wanted to paint.
Yes.
So I ran away from school and came back to Ireland,
Yeah.
hanging my head in disgrace. And so then I started painting at home. I didn't go to art school. I didn't want to be polluted in that way, which I regretted later. I'd love to have been with fellow students.
Just for the social aspect now? Or?
Social aspect, but also this technical aspect. I'd like to have done life drawing. I've never done life drawing. I've got a bit of a block about that. I mean, I'm not a draftsman. I've never seen lines around things. I see things in patches of colour, and I'm mainly a painter because I love colour.
Yeah, but that's not what you did initially, is it? You had a career in music.
Yes, well, it was around that time. I was still painting away, and my friend Tim Booth saw that I had a harmonium, because I was classically trained up to the age of 12.
In fact, Tim spent several years touring with the band Dr. Strangely Strange. They have 5 albums to their credit, and at one point in the UK had Elton John as their support act. Perhaps it was on tour that Tim developed his wicked sense of humour. He's not called Colonel Bassett for nothing.
I mean, the only one that truly understands me is Mr. Blue.
Really?
Well, they do say, if you want to know who loves you the most, your partner or your dog, lock them in the boot of your car for 4 hours and see who's pleased to see you when you open up.
That's so funny.
I know. That's very naughty, isn't it?
Every road you travel comes home again. Every road you travel comes home again.
Tim generally starts his day in meditation or writing poetry in what he calls the sunroom.
25, 30 poems.
Have you?
I'm just about to make them into a little poetry book. Like, here's one of my poetry books. And I've written 4 of these and self-published them on Blurb. I don't sell them or anything.
Okay.
But it's just lovely to have it written. Well, just looking, I mean, all my work is to do with our state of being and what we are and who we are and how we find ourselves. For God's sake, look at it. And,
yes.
And I'm just fascinated by that and have been all my life. So I suppose all my work is just about that. My sort of exploring. I mean, my poems aren't really poems in the ordinary meaning of poems. They're not sort of clever or They're not literary, but they're just about I'd call them, they're signposts, they're snapshots. They're snapshots how I am in the inner life, the life of...
Yeah, and I mean, does that really differentiate much from what you put into your artwork?
No, I mean, well, I find painting, music and poetry all come from the same source, the creative urge, if you like, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Whatever it is that makes us artists.
Yeah. And is there any one thing that you find inspires you more than something else? In other words, are you the sort of person who has to wait for inspiration to come to them, or can you get yourself into a frame of mind or a place that really encourages that creativity?
Yes, you're right. There is a place. I mean, I feel it's more a matter of going hunting. Not that I approve of hunting, but
a different type of hunting.
You're hanging around in a field until you pick up the scent.
Yes.
And then you pick up the scent, and then you go galloping.
Yeah.
And you might gallop over many fields in that particular direction, and then that gets played out, and then there can be a sort of fallow time when nothing much interests you, or no place particularly interests you. But
and is there a time of the year where you're more...
Well, I love winter.
Do you? Really, I was expecting you to say something else.
The light here. Yes, I know.
Really? Yeah.
It's just the light in the winter here, and the light, the beams of light coming down on the sea, and huge thundery skies. In the morning I come into this room and I sit quietly for a while, and then I watch those little birds. And they've been the inspiration for a few poems this year. In fact, I'll read you one, shall I?
Please do.
This is the feeder. They crowd each other out on the swinging branch, jostling so that they can take turns at the feeder. Large and small, meek and bullies. Occasionally a squabble erupts. Occasionally peace is restored. As long as there's food, there is action. I might leave some room in my heart for compassion. I could try observing without comment. How like thoughts these birds are. So that's really talking about the nature of thought.
Beautiful. Yes, lovely.
Years ago, as you know, I was very sick with liver disease and finally liver failure. And I went through a few different attempts to cure it, and finally the only hope was a transplant. And I was extremely lucky to be given a transplant at age 69. And so I was put on the list, and I got the transplant, and I won't hear one word ever about the HSE. Once you get into their clutches, I mean, they're just the most wonderful group of people, doctors and nurses. I just had, such incredible treatment from them. After a year to the day, after I had the transplant, Georgie and I went to a wedding in Castletownbere, and we went in at 2 o'clock and we came out at 2 the next morning. But that night we were able to go dancing, and this was a year after my transplant.
Yes.
So it sort of alerted me to writing something about that, which I'd given to the hospital, and they have it framed on the wall in the liver department, which is nice.
And I'm not surprised to hear it, yeah.
It's called The Easiest Words, which they were. We were introduced a year ago today in tragic circumstances. Immediately we became as intimate as is humanly possible. You have travelled with me since then, through thick and thin, through times of grave distress and pain, and times of unbounded gratitude. Although I know nothing of your story or even your name, I know that you are part of the mystery that we all are. You've enabled me to walk in the world again, and hopefully gain some wisdom about our shared situation, to gain some insights into freedom and compassion. I hope I'm giving you a piggyback. Some days the gratitude that is due is just not there. Other days I stumble on a reminder to bow low to you and your family's generosity. It could never be enough. You died last year, and yet we went dancing together at a wedding last night.
Tim's poetry reveals a side to him that is deeply profound and sensitive. He has a way of separating his different talents of poetry, music and art by doing something completely different in between, like going for a midday swim.
You're a brave man, Tim.
Yeah, well, it's so hot out. I needed to
Yes.
cool off.
It's late autumn, and at age 77, I ask him why on earth he goes through this punishment.
It heals the back.
Does
If
it?
you have backache, if you stand in it for 10 minutes, then you never feel a thing again.
We go back home to continue where we left off, but this time taking a look at his art practice.
Here's a look at my work chronologically. It's a biography of my life in painting, because the two run together, of course. And as you'll notice, my work changes as the years pass. I love the fact that Juan Miro had above his studio door, he'd found an old railway sign, and it said, "No train stops here." And this is how my work goes. One thing leads to another, but it doesn't stop for very long. So the very first one we'll probably see is the Bog Pool done up in Donegal, and it's a gouache on paper. And that's how I started out painting, very small scale in gouache, sort of semi-abstract, very much influenced by our friend Camille Souter, Paddy Collins, in that sort of area of painting. And then along comes the 60s, the late 60s, and along comes pop art. And I saw a wonderful exhibition by Andy Warhol in Trinity College, Andy Warhol banners. And I started using some of those imageries. I made some big banners myself, of cigarettes and of close-ups of blackberries and beans. I did a big bean banner for the Bank of Ireland. And so that's that. And then a big painting of mushrooms. And then in the early 70s, I was getting more and more into meditation, and I did a series of mandalas, which are sort of basically concentric circles, starting with a beam of light in the centre. I moved down to West Cork actually in 1968, and I decided, because I'd never been to art school, I decided I'd try and learn how to paint, basically. So I started sitting out in the landscape around here, and I did some very realistic representational paintings of the land here. And around that time I got a commission to do 8 wildflower paintings of West Cork. And I tended to do 2 or 3 in each picture and have the landscape of West Cork in the background. Later on I did a whole series of reeds reflected in water down the road here. This was in the late 70s, and I did some of them extremely abstract and some of them hyper-real, photographic real. In between that, I'd been sitting out in the landscape painting very detailed, I think I was telling you that. Yeah. Pictures of West Cork landscapes and houses. After the reeds, I did a whole show called Exploring the Cave, which was based on the sea arches around here. We might be able to visit them, and I was very happy with that. They were sort of semi-abstract. And then I did a show for the Curlin Gallery, and this was called Heartland, and this is much more sort of emotion built into the land. Big, thick, heavy impasto, textural, big paintings, most of them. I sold one of them to, who was the actor in The Field?
Richard Harris.
Richard Harris, yes. He came into the Curlin, and he went over to this big painting, which was the Connemara painting, you know.
Yes.
And he said, "I'd like to buy that." I said, "It's sold," and he said, "Fuck." So I thought I'd lost that one. And he went out and sat in the car with his chauffeur. And then he came in again and he said, "Are there any more of Connemara?" So I walked over to one that was called Heartland 16. I said, "Well, actually, this is Connemara as well." And he bought it. And it cost him as much to send to the Bahamas as it did to buy, actually, yes. So that was that.
Great story, yes.
We take a short break to explore the garden on this autumn day.
And we've layered it a bit and slowly imported different things. Very muddy, watch out. This is a winter cherry. It's beautiful when it comes out in the winter. This is the Zen garden.
Oh, the pond of Reed.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's the shade garden. It's a pity, it's all dying down now. These two beds are full of astilbes, which are wonderful in the summer. Yeah, so there's a little stream here. We call it the Little Dargle because I grew up. It is the Little Dargle. And there's a waterfall where there's a big fall of rain. That's a torrent coming down there. Absolutely beautiful. Then here's another bit of a story in my life, because paintings follow my life. In the mid-80s I went through, you could almost call it a mental breakdown, and I was wandering around in the middle of the night in the hills here, calling into a friend of mine for a cup of tea at 6:30 in the morning, and he said to me, "You're like a man in a prison cell, clawing at the bars, trying to see the light." And he said, "Why don't you turn around and look at the darkness?" And that absolutely sparked something in me. And it sparked a whole show, which I still think is one of my best shows, called Facing Darkness, Seeing Light. And the way I transfigured it was by going into the old copper mines here.
Yes.
And sneaking in under the wire, because you weren't allowed in, and climbing down in, and doing some drawings there and taking photographs. And I did a whole series of the mines, and we have a.
And wasn't there a photograph as well, or a series of photographs that were taken by somebody?
Yes, there was a wonderful English fashion photographer called Aldo Belmonte, Italian guy, and he was living down here, and we spent 2 days in the mines setting up these paintings of myself inside the mines. He had his son with a big reflector reflecting the sun's lights down into the cave, into the mine.
Yeah.
And in the mine we lit fires, so there was smoke coming up, and then beams of light were being articulated by the reflector, and he did some beautiful photographs. So then after that I did about 2007, I did a whole series of land divisions, abstract paintings based on fields around here, with little dots that are sort of like the houses as well. They're a bit like aerial photographs. And I was very pleased with that show.
Mm-hmm.
And then, as usual, there's a sort of hiatus, and then something else appears, and this time it was jellyfish. So I did a whole series based on jellyfish, which I showed in the Hammond Gallery in Glengariff and in Taylor's as well. And some of them were very big. It was called Floating World.
And what year are we there?
That were about 2007, because soon after that I was on these medications to try and get rid of hepatitis C, which is an invasive thing, and but the medication is pretty horrific, and one of the side effects is suicidal depression. So I was told I had to go and see a psychiatrist before taking it, and it would take me 6 months. And in the hospital they said, well, when you go home you might get very angry and very depressed and your paintings will turn black. And I thought, I'm not going to do that. So I went home and I spent a lot of time lying on the sofa and going through nasty depression, I think. But my cat brought me through. And so I decided, anyway, I'm not going to yield to this blackness. So I painted a whole exhibition of clouds, of clear sky. There's one next door we'll see, actually, because it's in for repair at the moment.
Yes.
And so that was the clouds in 2011, and I showed them in Dublin as well. All along, from late 1990, I'd been painting fires, the bog fires, which I'm quite well known around here for them. Night fires, when they burn off the gorse in the spring.
Yes.
And it's very, very dramatic. Great excuse to introduce sort of pillar blocks of red in a landscape.
Yeah.
And so I did a whole series of them, and still occasionally do them to commission. And they led into these paintings called Patching the Void. This is in 2014-15. And they're completely abstract with a lot of texture. And I love this series, I was mad about them. And funnily enough, they led into the next series. But so I did a series of those. I felt they were the best things I'd ever done. But I was very, very ill at that point. And I actually had a show of them in the Taylor Galleries in 2016, I think it was. I showed them, that's right, and I did some colour etchings, which I was very proud of as well. And I loved that show. But I was in hospital when it was shown, 2016, the beginning of 2016, and I was too ill to go to the opening. But my friend in Dublin, I was talking to her on the phone, she said, oh, it was a great show, really well attended. She said it was like a wake, but there was no body.
Yes.
So then, as I was telling you, when I got home, I did a sort of homecoming exhibition. Because, I mean, when I left to get my transplant, I mean, Georgina was told it was 50-50 whether I'd come out the other end. So, and when I left here, I'd sort of said goodbye to the house and everything here.
Yes.
Felt completely at peace at leaving it. But when I came back, it was like homecoming. So I did a whole series of the village here and the landscape around.
Yeah.
And then the music thing cut in.
All right.
And I started on the music series around that time. And I'm still working on the tail end of that.
Yeah. Wonderful. So that brings us up to date.
In this latest music series, Tim constructs his paintings as if arranging a musical work, paying attention to counterpoint, harmony, and the spaces between, implying rhythm. His work is uplifting, joyous, and in harmony. You could say it's singing in colour. It's time for a cup of tea, and I asked Tim's wife, Georgina, what life is like living perched high up on Eagle Hill.
Now, because this is a day in the life, right, we'd love to get a flavour of what happens in the Goulding household from early morning onwards. I mean, you've got the two dogs who I'm sure take you both for a walk.
Yeah, I think there's a dog locked in here. Yeah.
There you are. So tell us about the two dogs, actually, because they're very much part of the house, aren't they?
Very much, yeah. Yeah, we got Tilly about a year and a half ago. She's the rock-haired lurcher, very giddy.
Yeah.
So we rescued her from Tipperary. She was in a home in Tipperary, and very happy to bring her home.
Yes.
And then Blue kind of turned up via Facebook. We saw a photo of him. And Blue likes to talk a little, don't you, Blue?
Woof, yes.
Yes. Yes, but this is something we've done together. Blue, do down dog. Good boy. He does a little bit of yoga, you see? Do down dog. Good boy. Good boy.
That's wonderful.
There's always something happening. Hey. Okay, that's enough now. You know, the camera's on.
Okay, so now we know who the boss is.
Yes, so, yes, as I said, there's always something happening in this house. Somebody is calling or visiting or, there's never really a dull moment.
Yeah.
Music, yeah. It's always something happening. with
You
music.
organise a lot of things as well for the community, don't you?
Yes, well, to be honest, since COVID, I haven't really done any organisation, but I hope to get back into it next year. I mean, it is a wonderful lifestyle, and I wouldn't give it up for anything. I wouldn't want to live anywhere else in the world. Really
that's
wouldn't.
right.
Yeah. The only thing is, I suppose, in the winter, you know, if you get storm after storm, it's nice to get off the peninsula, even for a night.
So it's back to the studio to view a series of etchings which incorporate his poetry.
This is a suite of 6 colour etchings that I made in the graphic studio in 2016, and they tie in my poems with my paintings.
That is really beautiful.
I'm really happy with these. These are letterpress. It's an edition of 30, but the edition with poems is only 10.
Yes. They are beautiful.
I'm so happy with these.
Gosh.
The National Library of Ireland bought a copy, a set of these.
Do they, yeah?
These were, Robert Russell was the man who worked on these with me, the master printer. And this painting, is, the poem that goes with it is Petals. The ruby petals of my life float to the ground, the land of their birth. And Robert said to me, I hope they don't float too soon, he said. So that was it.
Yeah, they are fantastic.
I've sold 3 of them so far.
Okay.
Tim's strong work ethic includes the daily composition of poetry and music, but art is always foremost in his mind. And so he settles down to a late afternoon painting, which is very likely to continue well into the night and the wee small hours. Before we take our leave, I asked Tim about a beautiful piano in his studio, which I know is his pride and joy.
Because this piano, a Bechstein Boudoir Grand, was given to my parents on their wedding day by my grandmother. It was built in 1896, and it's a beautiful piano. It was in my mother's house, and when she died it passed on to me. My dad used to play sort of dance music of the 50s on it, but the very special thing about this piano is that I grew up in County Wicklow and never saw a black man in my life, really, for the first few years of my life. But the first black man I saw came into the living room one evening, and who was it but Louis Armstrong? And recently I had a wonderful jazz piano player, Greg Felton. He came to play this piano, and I told him that Louis had played this piano, and he kissed it. Give you a little tinkle on it. This is a tune I wrote for on the birth of my granddaughter, Odessa, and this is Odessa's song.
the ocean song that weaveth mighty music, that quells the beast within the man, that the darkest fever sootheth, dispelling awkward